everyone to what I think is going to be a really interesting edition of Training Unleashed. Before we get going, on behalf of the Learning Network, I want to welcome everyone to the show and thank our sponsors, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. Our guest today is Tara Londras, and she is a learning training expert working with companies in strategic planning and leadership training, really designed to help take the small 10 to 100 company to the next level. Tara, I know that you're expecting me to ask you a question about the kind of training you do, why it works, etc. I am not going to do that. Instead, I am going to ask you to talk about the modality of training you do on your leadership training, because you do it differently than most people. I think this is something companies used to do a fair amount and have gotten away from, but I think it's a very effective modality. So don't talk about the training itself, which I'm sure you want to, and we'll get to that, but just talk about how you do your leadership training with companies.
Yeah, and first of all, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and have this conversation. The way we train is we train synchronously online. So people have to show up live, and we provide a 3-hour class, which sounds like a really long time to be online, I understand. But within every hour, we have about 20 minutes of breakout rooms interspersed throughout. So a lot of the training is workshopping, where people actually use the theories that they were told. We then, after class, about 2 weeks after class, everyone gets a one-on-one with a coach. So they get to go away with the practical tips and tools. Their job is to use them at work. And then we get back together to see how it went for them personally. We find it really reinforces the learning.
So do you do any pre-learning beforehand, like things that they do before they start?
Yeah, we do have maybe 15 minutes of pre-work. It's usually a case study or something like that. We're just trying to get their brains engaged in it. And that's actually one of the things that they end up talking about in the breakout room is the case study.
Cool. So this is what I'm hearing is there's pre-work. You do a workshop where there's straight, direct, traditional training. Then people have to demonstrate use in breakouts. You're doing breakouts on a frequent basis, so people are getting re-energized, engaged. Can't skip something because then they're going to be exposed.
Yep.
And then 2 weeks later, people have to demonstrate use and get one-on-one coaching.
You bet. And in addition to that, we also, once you're a graduate for life. So you can come back for free anytime and participate in a class. You don't get the one-on-ones for free, but sometimes people want to come back and relearn on different topics that become relevant in that moment.
So what are some of the topics you use this methodology for?
We have motivation, setting expectations and delegation, how to hold great meetings, all sorts of different topics, really, that tough talks, how to have difficult conversations, building high performance teams. It really runs the gamut of management.
So let's practice a tough talk.
Oh no. Okay.
Tara, your meeting's on Thursday. It's the only day of the week I can't go on Thursday. Can't you do the meeting on Wednesday?
Well, I guess I would dig into why you're saying that. Typically, the tough talk topic that we use is around asking for a raise, because we find that everybody has needed to ask for a raise at some point. Even if they own the business themselves, they've got to ask their customers for raises. And so we start with that topic, and we will have them think about the why, what's in it for them, and what's in it for the other person. So wherever the tough talk is, it could be, it could even be about a personal hygiene issue. But the issue is what's in it for them and what's in it for me, because if we can find a common goal, we can have a much better, more successful tough talk.
Well, I love that answer because I think it tells a lot about what you do and how you work. I was kind of joking with my tough talk, but I was really wondering because the people that are asynchronous argue the benefit of being asynchronous is people can take the training whenever they can take the training.
Mhm,
And with being synchronous, you're set to a certain time.
mhm.
Is that been a problem? Do you do training really frequently? How do you overcome that objection?
I think it's an excellent question. We do training on Wednesday mornings. So you're at Pacific time. So that takes care of North America for us, and it's in English. But The way we deal with that objection is that if they're going to do this, it's once a month for either 8 or 12 months. And we want them to treat it importantly enough that they make room in their schedule for it. If it really doesn't work, of course, we do private classes as well. And so if we're doing it within a company as opposed to a public cohort, then we can accommodate other times.
So it's actually not really one course at a time, and you kind of pick and choose what course you take. It's a
No.
series of courses,
It's a series of classes. So it's one
classes.
course called Management Foundations, and it's a series of either 8 or 12 classes. It depends if they want the advanced content. And so it'll run for 8 months or for a year. We've found that pacing to be ideal for people to use the tools that they're given and make them habits before they get the next chunk of content. I'm so frustrated by people who sit in a class and learn something in that moment but then don't review it and reinforce it. And not only did they sort of lose that knowledge, but they think they have it. And so they don't go to relearn it or re up on that topic because they think, oh, I already went to that. I already learned that. But if they're not using it, did they really learn it? I don't know.
Well, I actually really like the fact that you're limiting your content, you're doing the one-on-one coaching, you're doing the foundation, you're having people use what they learned because people can only learn so much at one time. And, that's the difficulty of going away for a 3-day weekend is you're motivated the whole time. But then when you ask somebody, well, what happened on day one? It's like,
Yeah,
and, there are certain content that is effective, which builds and builds and things of that nature. But by and large, most content is much better done in blocks. But if let's say it's a month, you only do it one day that month. So it's not like there's three options that month for you to make your training.
the learner only does it one day that month, but we train every month, every Wednesday morning.
Okay, so if I just have to be able to make one Wednesday morning,
That's right.
so that's much easier for the learner
Yes.
to actually make.
Yeah, and just building on your previous point as well, we're not just training the things that the learner can use. Because this is management training, we want to build a toolkit because they are managing other people that they will have to train. So, for example, our time management module has 6 different tactics involved with time management. And some of them, frankly, don't work for me, but they work for other people because we're all wired a little differently. And so we're trying to build not just their ability, our learners' ability, but actually their ability to teach their staff.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears because you're an expert in one of my favorite topics, which is one-on-one coaching or touch bases.
Yep,
I think as a leader, having quality one-on-one time to really help improve someone's performance is critical. And why don't we, before you talk about how or what, why did you guys come up with that being important? And, a little bit of sort of the history and what you saw, what you learned, and what you found.
sure. So the reason we even have our management training program is because we are doing deep implementation work inside small businesses. And what that means is going in, embedding a consultant in the environment to help build their foundational systems, job descriptions, dashboards, budgets, the real sort of core of what a business does. And as we were doing that work, we'd be sitting in the office of the client and somebody would come up and they'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to bother you, but I just have this quick question I want to ask. So and so over there, they don't do the thing that I asked them to do. Like, do you have any advice for me? And we'd be delighted to help them. Really interrupted our flow, but we're happy to help them. And we talk to them about that, get back to our work. 5 minutes later, someone else comes up. I'm sorry, I don't mean to bother you, but I'm trying to figure out how to measure this, and all we've got is subjective, and so we'd answer their question as well, and it was just really inefficient. So we created the management training program so that we could at least cover off the theory. We still wanted to have those conversations about how to apply the tactics, but we wanted to have a baseline. It was just way more efficient to teach everybody at once. So that's how it was born. And one-on-ones are a core of our program, both for managers to learn as well as for us to give, because that's where the real application happens of whatever challenge people are facing. So that's where the one-on-ones came from. And that's where we also train one-on-ones to our management learners.
Okay, very interesting. And I like that evolution of people because this is really part of what good training companies do is they look for the common mistakes, the common issues, the common errors, and they look to how do we now solve these issues and make companies better. So tell us more about how the one-on-ones actually work. And are these one-on-ones specifically to the training, or do you do one-on-one coaching just in general?
Yeah, well, we do one-on-one coaching in general. It's part of what we're training on. So one-on-ones for the training are really, some people even call it business therapy. People come with whatever's on their mind. We can talk about the content and how they applied the content, or we can talk about whatever's going on in their business. And I would say 90% of the time, that's what we end up talking about is the stuff that's top of mind for them, which is, I think is nice because they get to do sort of callbacks to previous content in previous months. And so again, the reinforcement is there. But when we talk about training one-on-ones with our managers, typically there are a few objections we hear very commonly. One of them, especially in small companies, oh, I talk to them all the time. Why do I have to have this? Or I don't have time. I'm so busy. I don't have time. Are you kidding me? You wanted me to add how many meetings into my schedule for every week? What are you talking about? And so there are lots of objections we get. But at the same time, what we know is that the Gallup organization, who've studied millions and millions of managers, have found that if an employee feels like their manager ignores them, their disengagement scores, like their active disengagement, like walking around the office going, I hate it here. Don't you hate it here? Come on, come with me. We'll all hate it together. It goes through the roof. In fact, people would rather have constant negative feedback from their manager than be ignored. I'll ask you this, Evan, with when you think about managers, when they're managing their top performers, my experience in small business is more often than not, those are the ones that get ignored because they already know what they're doing and they're going, oh, at least I don't have to worry about that guy. I can focus on these problem people. At least I don't have to worry about them. Well, if you don't have your one-on-ones with that person on a regular basis, they're going to feel ignored. You might see them quiet quit because they're looking for some attention. I mean, they're humans just like the rest of us.
You're dead on. And when you look at high performers, if you're looking to produce more performance, they're the most likely to produce more performance than the low performer.
Exactly. And
And
they need so little attention to do it.
yeah. And speaking of Gallup,
Yeah.
and I know that you know this because if you're a fan of Gallup, you know they have a concept called strength finders.
Yes, of course.
And what strength finders talks about is matching and focusing on building on people's strengths. There's a tendency for managers to focus on fixing someone's weaknesses as opposed to focusing on their strengths and finding other people or other methodologies to help them overcome those weaknesses rather than trying to teach them on how to do something they hate doing.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Yes. And we focus on strengths and we talk about that. You know, it's really hard to fix whatever was left out in a human when they came onto this world. It is far easier and more enjoyable for everybody to swim with the current, focus on their strengths. Just a little story. My son, when he was younger, there used to be so many fights around the dinner table at our house about math. Got to learn your timetables, got to learn your timetables. And he just wasn't that interested. But the kid at the same time started creating a little newspaper on his own that he would deliver around our neighborhood just because he loved it. And between you and me and everybody who's listening right now, I don't think my kid is ever going to be a Pulitzer Prize winning physicist, but he could be a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. That position exists in the future.
Yeah. Ever feel like your training sessions are getting a little old, a little tired? Want to add some excitement with some extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, 360 training? Well, you can do that today with the Learning Network. Your employees can immerse themselves in real world scenarios, boosting engagement, more importantly, increasing knowledge retention. Learn more today by going to learning.net and book a demo and learn all about extended reality training. The time is now. Who knows what the future is going to bring?
Who knows? But if he focuses on the strengths, he's going to be okay.
Yes, very interesting. So let's just share a few nuggets. What are the best practices for one of our listeners who either does one-on-ones or is thinking about doing one-on-ones, how they set them up, how they structure
Sure.
them?
Yeah. So, first of all, don't start with everyone at once. If you're just starting one-on-ones for the first time, don't decide I'm now going to do one-on-ones with everybody. Pick a couple of people to start with. We want to make sure that this habit is created in a sustainable way. So, for people, especially people who are pressed for time, just choose one or two people to start with when you're holding your one-on-ones. Pick the good ones between you and me. Pick the ones that you know are really strong performers and focus on those strengths because we know you're going to get outsized rewards by working with those people more closely, and it avoids the danger of possibly ignoring them and eventually losing them.
Well, it also takes the stigma away from people
Yes.
thinking, oh, you're just taking the people that are in trouble.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Totally agree. Have a regular cadence. So one-on-one meetings should be regularly scheduled, rarely missed, and ideally face-to-face or like this. This is good.
So all the listeners know we're on a Zoom because our
Yeah.
show is also a TV show on C-Suite TV and on YouTube, Training Unleashed Network. And so she's looking at me because she's basically saying doing a Zoom or any kind of video conference is acceptable.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification. So regularly scheduled, rarely missed, ideally face-to-face, and time-bound. So if your one-on-one is 25 minutes, that's great, gives you 5 minutes to get to whatever you need to do. If it's 50 minutes, that's great too, gives you 10 minutes to get to whatever the next thing is, but keep to your time bound limits. You can end early. Nobody gets upset if a meeting ends early. Everyone gets upset if a meeting ends late. So keep them time bound. And one of the downsides of having these regularly scheduled meetings is if you do have a busy calendar, maybe you got to catch a flight to Florida and you can't make your one-on-one that week. You don't want people to feel like they're not important. If you need to reschedule a one-on-one, reschedule it for the day before or sometime before it was supposed to happen to demonstrate how important that one-on-one is to you. Because you need to know as a manager that the person you're having a one-on with, they see the way you treat that meeting as what you think of them. So if it's not important to you, they aren't important to you.
So I just like to share with you some of my best practices, if
Yeah.
that's okay. My number one fear of a one-on-one is the fear of interrogation, that the person that's being interviewed or being just talked to is going to feel interrogated. So a one-on-one where, okay, here's your to-do list. Did you get this done yet? Did you get this done yet? Did you get this done yet? Is an interrogation. So I always like to start with a simple question. What were your successes this week? What things worked? And let them share their successes and share their story. You start positively. Then my next question is, what were your learnings? What didn't work? What didn't you get to?
Mm-hmm.
And then let them tell me. So again, I'm not interrogating them.
Mm-hmm.
Then I like to follow up and say, okay, what are your plans for next week? So they're updating and creating their own to-do list as opposed to me.
Right.
And then the balance of time I like to use for coaching on a skill or a service.
Mm.
That's how I do it. I suspect you do it differently. And by the way, that's the beauty of the world is we all do things differently. But what and how could you take the ideas I have and make them better? Or I'm perfectly fine with you telling me my ideas are terrible. After listening to me, what other advice would you give people?
Yeah, so my technique is a little different because I like the one-on-one to be led by the other person. So my questions are more like, what's on your mind and what else? I like them to have a shared document that they've set up so that both of us can put ideas in about what we're going to be talking about when we see each other. You can absolutely have one-on-ones about the weekly tasks and the daily things, but I do like to elevate it a little bit. So having themes of training, for example, if you've got something that's come up, let's talk about how we're using AI in the workplace right now, or let's talk about how motivated do you feel these days relative to usual, and what kind of things do you do to try to feel more motivated, or different themes. I find that managers can stick with those themes and actually have a groundswell of change within their department if they're operating in that way.
Love those ideas. Tara, you're obviously very bright. What your company does, I think, is very interesting. I think our learners would love to know more about you, your company, the type of services. And I'm going to start actually asking you a question, which, by the way, if anyone follows the show, I never do. But I was sitting here thinking, as you say, look, we like to work with companies from 10 to 100, but sometimes a company could have 1,000, but maybe it's a division which is 10 to 100.
Yes.
You do that too?
We do, yes.
Okay.
And I should also clarify that our management training is for anybody. I mean, I think every manager can use our management training program. It was born from small business. But when I go into larger organizations, it turns out that a lot of people never got training on the foundations of management. A lot of times they were an individual contributor who did a really good job being that individual contributor, and the boss thought, you should be a manager, which in many ways is kind of interesting thinking because I just took my best performer, took them out of what they were doing and what they were really good at, and then decided to make them a manager where now they don't even know how to do that and they don't get the training. They don't get those. Some of this stuff is really basic, but if you've never been exposed to it before, you might never uncover it on your own. Even I have an MBA that I got at the turn of the century, and we never learned how to manage people, really. We learned how to manage IBM, but we didn't learn how to manage Debbie, who works at IBM.
I'm just laughing at the turn of the century because I got my MBA in 1984.
Yeah, well, then you're in my cohort. Yeah, so what we do though is we in the management training program is we bring in groups. We can do private classes or public classes. The great thing about either offering is that the public classes are running all the time. So if somebody misses a class or if they just want a refresher, as I said, they're welcome to come back for free. What we really want is for people to use the tools. It's so important to us that these things actually get implemented. It's everything. And what is most gratifying for us as well is watching people's career progression. We become very tightly embedded in people's lives, in their careers, for a short period of time, 8 months, 12 months. But we love following them and seeing the progression and watching them get their promotions and how their careers unfold. So they kind of end up with a coach for life when they work with us.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
Okay, be a little judgmental here. I am sure people want to know your URL and how to reach you, and I know you have an offer.
I
So I'd
do.
like to remind you to please share all of those things.
I don't know if that's judgmental. I think I just got really excited with the conversation. But yes, we're Bellrock is the name of our company. So BELLROCK.ca. We are named after a sea-washed lighthouse off the coast of Scotland that was built many centuries ago and still stands on its original foundation that the Masons put out there. So, we're hopefully a beacon. And we have some great downloadables on our site, free of charge. Everything's for free because we're just trying to get people to do the things. And one of the most popular downloadables we have is our guide to one-on-ones. So if any of your listeners were hearing this and thinking, well, maybe I'd like to try, there's quite a comprehensive guide there that they can use to get going. And more than anything, we would love them to drop us a line at answers@bellrock.ca and let us know how it went.
Okay, so you got a lot of free deliverables. I went there. The reason I talked to you about one-on-ones is because I noticed the one-on-one
Mhm,
deliverable, which I think is fantastic. You
mhm.
also have a newsletter you can sign up for.
Sure do.
See,
Yeah, so our newsletter once a month comes out, give or take, where we write an article about something that we've noticed in our one-on-ones, back to these themes of management. We're always trying to do things that are very practical and timely. So it will have an article, it will have 3 quick tips as well. Quick things
oh,
that you can jump into for it, it'll tell you either if you have a minute, you could do this, or if you have 10 minutes, you can do this, or if you have an hour, you can do this. People seem to really enjoy the newsletter. It doesn't come out too frequently, so when it does, they like to read it.
well, that's very cool. I like the 3 tips, but we in this show have one tip.
I know.
And
Yep.
what is your one tip? But before you say that, I am outside of Boston. I actually have a view of the Boston Harbor, and we have the oldest working lighthouse in America.
Really?
Yes, you can take a boat out there, and it is amazing to look at the glasswork and the things that they do to get like a 60-watt light bulb to shine for 20 miles.
Isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm a sailor. I actually grew up sailing on Lake Ontario. So I now I need to come to Boston and check out that lighthouse.
that'd be very cool. So anyhow, what is your one tip?
Well, my one tip is for everybody who's listening right now to think about whatever the tip they want, but let's say think about one-on-ones and schedule in your calendar a 15-minute meeting with yourself tomorrow to review what you learned today. By reviewing whatever it is that you learned today, your chances of retaining that over time will go up tremendously. And so very little learning is one and done. Very little learning is one and done.
I love your tip because we're well over 200 shows now, and it's a unique tip, and there are not a lot of them. But I'm going to build on your tip,
Okay.
especially for people that are still going to academia. You know, when you go to college and you're reading a book, everyone gets out the highlighter and highlights all the important information. Well, they've shown that mentally, everything you highlight, you forget because your mind knows it doesn't need to remember it.
Mhm.
It's saved by the highlight. So all the highlight does is allow you to sort of reread the book pretty quickly before the test. If you really want to learn the information, you take out a separate notepad or you write in the margins and you take the idea, put it in your own words, and write it down. So, to the point of every day taking what you've learned and writing that down, massively increase your retention of the information.
I want to build on that as well.
We might be getting close to the 3 tips you're used to.
Oh
Please.
yeah. Well, the the writing, it's actually the writing, the act of handwriting that
Yeah.
really helps with retention. And so what a lot of people will say to you is, yeah, but I don't have time, so I've got to take my notes on the computer because I don't have time to transcribe them later. Well, guess what? Use your iPad or get a Remarkable or a Scribe or something like that. Write it down, handwrite it down, and get the computer to turn it into notes that you can review. It's
Yeah.
that handwriting that makes the difference. So I'm with you.
It's interesting because I'm very dyslexic.
Hmm. I didn't know there was very dyslexic and just somewhat dyslexic.
Well, there are degrees of dyslexia, and there
Okay.
are a spectrum of dyslexia if we're getting into a real conversation.
Okay.
But my writing by hand is very difficult. So
Mm,
I dictate,
right.
and I find that the dictation allows me to be more complete, where like when I type short, quick. Anyhow,
That's really interesting though, because you could also listen back to your notes, which would be another great, once you've
yeah,
dictated, you could also listen back, which allows you to absorb it even faster. That's great.
yeah. So I'm going to challenge everyone after they get done listening to this that they should take their key takeaways and write them down right now. Okay. On behalf of the Learning Network, thank you for being our guest. Thank you for the audience for listening or watching. Want to thank our sponsors, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. Also, we want to remind people on YouTube, Training Unleashed Network, and you can go and watch the show. And if you go to trainingunleashed.net, you can go and there's over 200 episodes, and we have a search function, and you can search by topic, search by people, names. and learn whatever you want to learn. Everyone have a fantastic day.